this is what I'm proposing to do. Is there any reason that this won't pass or that you're going to require more?
That's interesting, because I think most people don't realize, like, gee, we'll just finish up there and put some sheetrock up and carpet and, you know.
It's the same process. Everything, you have to get it inspected, and you don't want to have to do things twice. So it's easier for you, especially framing wise, if you need to reach that higher R value and you have to build down your joists to fit that in there, you're going to want to do that beforehand.
And that brings us back to the material for the application, right? Whatever the wherever the situation, excuse me, is going to dictate what product we use. We got to get to a certain number, right? And a certain number, in some cases, like Michelle said, is going to be required. Some towns do require you to pull a permit, have it inspected, and close a permit. And the inspector is going to be the one to determine whether that R value, whether you did enough, right, in that area to make it, to make them and happy with the end result. And again, the best way to do is to, as she said, was to check, right? You can always just check with the building inspector, and you're never going to fail if you get the answer ahead of time.
Yeah,
right.
That's right. Save a lot of headaches.
Save all the trouble you can by having that conversation.
So then we have the other end of the house, the basement, which people look down there. In a lot of the older homes you go in, there is no insulation down there.
Right.
So, say someone's buying an existing home, it's older, there's no insulation down there. What would they be looking at?
Well, even more so, you brought up the point, right? There's you have nothing in the basement ceiling in a lot of the existing homes in our area. We in New England are blessed with the oldest housing stock in the United States. So I mean, our homes seriously vary, and they vary greatly. Excuse me. And a lot of times you'll see, we'll call them partially finished basements, which we only call it that because, I mean, there's a washer and dryer down there, right? And there's no heat in the there's no insulation in the basement ceiling, so you're, in essence, you're heating that area. You're taking advantage of the 55 degrees of geothermal temperature that's coming out of the basement floor, mixed with your heat. I mean, heat doesn't just rise. I mean, heat's air while it's more buoyant. Warmer air is more buoyant than cooler air. It will still chase cold air. It'll fill voids, right? It'll make its way down to the basement. So that's why you also have heat coming off of your heating appliances, such as furnaces or boilers, right? So all that combined. So now you've got this basement that's semi-conditioned, right? So you do try to define the envelope. If you can define the envelope, you can control where you're heating, right? Your thermostats tend to work a little better. You won't hear the furnace or boiler kick on as often by defining your thermal envelope, right? Insulating your attic would be your step one. And step two, again, then addressing your basement. When you're addressing the basement, we like to use products. Generally, we like to use fiberglass. Reason being is because each house is different, right? And in older homes, there tends to be moisture in the basement. If there is moisture present, if we can't, or if the homeowner can't solve that moisture problem, we're going to want to isolate it. And if we do that, we don't want to put something that's going to maybe cause problems on the road. Cellulose, if it gets wet or moist, it can, because it's an organic compound, it can tend to be an area for breeding for say, mold.
Oh, I was afraid that was coming.
And if water, but I don't want to say cellulose causes mold, not by any means. Or just saying
it's the factors around it.
It's the factors surrounding it, exactly. And if cellulose does get wet, then its R value is actually been
depleted,
depleted. Exactly. So we tend to use fiberglass in basement ceilings when we can. I brought with us, it's an Owens Corning product, the Pro Pink. It's called Pro Pink bagged insulation, or Pro Pink Black.
It's very pretty.
Yeah, exactly. The difference that you see, it's got the vapor barrier on one side, which always goes towards the living space.
Thank you.
So if you go
repeat
down
that for them watching, because you have so many homes you go in, it's turned the wrong way.
Exactly. And I know I may have just contradicted myself when I talk about isolating moisture, right? If you got moisture in the basement, you don't want it to be traveling through. This vapor barrier will actually help will help contain that a little bit, keep that out of the material. This vapor barrier is the most important, which is why it's got to be towards the living space, right, against the floor.
So when you're putting it up into the ceiling, the paper is up top.
I mean, there's so much more water generated in the living space, moisture generated in the living space. You got your, showers.
Basically high pressure to low pressure.
Exactly. So you want that moisture to stop before it actually gets to the insulation.
So this here being wrapped with the paper, the advantage is you don't have the particles coming off.
Right.
Exactly, and that's why, great point, because so this is on your side that faces the basement. So if you're going to be going down and using your washer and dryer, or if you have a carpet and a TV in the basement, while it's not conditioned, but your kids go down there and play in the basement, this will limit the amount of dust that can be collected and or distributed if you touch it or anything with regular fiberglass that's left exposed.
Right.
It's more of a comfort adder to the application. So we do use this. This is a 6 1/4 inch bag. It's an R19.
So this would be just typically in the basement. You would use this type of thing, like if you were doing an attic or whatever. You wouldn't be doing the bag stuff.
Because you're really gaining the benefit with the bag around it, with, like you said, the particles and the dust, the dust factor.
Now, if you have a totally unused basement, you don't ever go down there, and you're only using it for storage, or maybe you go down once a year, or if you need to change a fuse or something, you don't need to use something like this. This is more for, again, if you're going down once in a while to do certain activities, and
not going to totally finish it, but
exactly,
but be using it.
Exactly.
Right. So if, for example, say someone's in a younger home, but they haven't finished the basement, and not real young, because obviously it has insulation on the ceiling, but there's nothing up there, but now they want to insulate the basement, but with a thought down the road that they're probably going to finish a playroom down there not too far in the future. So would you do a different type so that you're not separating those spaces, because now they're going to finish this area and heat it. So rather than having a barrier between it, would you do the walls, or you would still do the ceiling?
You would still have to do the ceiling, because until that space becomes a conditioned space, you have to provide that vapor barrier in between the living space and the unconditioned space. So until that happens...
Oh, because the person that's pulling the permit's going to do this.
Right.
Some people, if they're just looking to add some insulation and they're putting it up themselves.
Right. If they're going to put if they don't have any insulation in there at all, and they go down there and say, we're going to finish this entire space and we're going to insulate the walls, that becomes your new envelope. The walls become your new envelope rather than the basement ceiling becoming the end of the envelope. So you're only required to, because that's going to be a heated space, you're only required to insulate the rim joists and those walls.
So if
because
you're doing
it's okay
it at that
if that
time,
heat
you do it that
is
way.
traveling between the zones.
So what type of insulation would you do on the walls at that point?
Again, it depends.
The choice.
It all depends.
It all depends on what. If you have an open party wall, right, with just 2x4 or 2x6 joists and bays, probably use fiberglass. We need to have a craft face fiberglass to again have that vapor barrier towards the inside, be able to face staple them up, and or friction fit it.
The one thing you do want to avoid is sometimes people buy a home and they'll have a conditioned space downstairs, but there's no insulation in the walls. You can't just blow cellulose or fiberglass into that space, because you don't want that against your foundation, which is going to produce some moisture.
Right.
You want to leave a space so that there is that airflow for the ventilation there.
It's a good point, because I think a lot of people think, gee, this is easy to do. I'm just going to go do this and go buy the stuff. And
well, it's
next thing you know, they have a problem down the road, right?
No, it's a great point. When you bring up, we touched on earlier about air sealing, right? Air sealing, I mean, if you don't know what it is, you fill all the electrical penetrations, the plumbing penetrations with a caulking or a fire-safe foam, half-pound foam can. Do a lot of the joints, right? We basically eliminate all areas that air can or energy can transfer through that we can, right? Sounds like it's very easy to do yourself, right? I can go do it myself. I know I can. I've done it, right? But there are things to be aware of. And again, when you talk about health and safety health and safety issues. You don't want to make your house too tight. If you make your house too tight, now you're introducing maybe more problems. If air doesn't have a certain amount of changing, you know, per hour, in movement per hour, it can get stale. Right now, when it's stale, you can be causing, it could be a higher level of carbon monoxide that's generated from your appliances,
Radon.
gas appliances, radon. There's all kinds of things. So a house needs to be able to breathe. We just want to be able to control it, though. So how do we do that? We use what we call a blower door test. A blower door test, what it does is we depressurize the house to -50 pascals. A pascal is 1 pascal is basically the equivalent of a Post-it note on your hand, right? And so when we do that diagnostic test, we can set, before we air seal, we find out exactly how much air is actually moving through the house naturally. And we call it naturally because all -50 pascals is the equivalent of 25-mile-an-hour winds blowing outside. So we're kind of reenacting a situation where you've got, you know, somewhat heavy winds blowing outside your house, but it's how your house is now behaving when that wind is blowing. We're depressurizing the house, right? We're able to find out where air infiltration is. But we also have a baseline of what to go by. We take a calculation of the size of the entire house, what's the minimum it should be doing, because again, we talked about how your house needs to breathe. So what's the minimum amount of airflow? We don't want to make it too tight. And we have something to work with now. So when we air seal, we have that number in mind, right? That baseline number that we don't want to go past, that point of no return, because if you go past that number, now you're talking about introducing air, right? And that's something we do suggest. I mean, if you can air seal your house up tight as a drum, and then introduce air where you want it, such as not opening a window. We certainly don't suggest that, right? But if you want to introduce air where you want it, there are definitely, you know, different application methods to do so. You're controlling that. You're not wasting energy. You're bringing in fresh air, whether it's into the heating system to be distributed, it's against fresh air being moved, or something like we call a fan in the can, where we just we have a bath fan that's on a cycle timer that's recycling air into that. So there's different application methods. I guess the point is, though, is that we're able to quantify how much we've done and how much good we've done, right? By telling you the CFM difference before and after air sealing. We have that point of no return, right, that we make sure we stay away from in order to keep the house safe.
Well, it's like very scientific.
I know,
I think most people think,
It is.
gee, I'm just going to like do some insulation, but obviously to do it right and to have the success. We're almost ready to wrap up, but I just, before we go, I know that you had mentioned the importance of other items besides insulation that can assist with it. I think you would mention gutters, and we just have a minute or so, but if you wanted to just mention that briefly,
Yeah, just
be a topic for another show, really.
No, but it's a great point. You know, I mean, gutters are, you know, yes, I mean, they help keep your landscaping fresh, right? And they make sure you don't, you know, water doesn't come off your home too aggressively and ruin your landscaping. Doesn't hit people on the head as you're coming inside.
But in terms of the insulation.
But exactly, it's moisture management. We keep that moisture away from the house. We talked about moist basements, right? Sometimes the moisture is because, you know, you have certain valleys surrounding your foundation where if water's coming off, water's going to pool towards that area, get into that living space, coming through the foundation, right? Pooling up around the perimeter or coming up through. So we use gutters and you know, to keep water away from the house.
So it's a whole approach.
Exactly,
to
it's a
the
whole
other.
house approach.
So as I explained to you before, the show goes really quickly. There's always so much to cover, and really appreciate you going over all this, and hope you'll come back and join us again so that we can get into it even further, because it is something that everyone has a concern about in their homes, obviously.
We'd love to.
So I want to thank you again. Again, with us today has been Michelle Medina and Luke Benson from QAS Insulation.
Quality Insulation.
Quality Insulation. I'm sorry. It's old abbreviation, right?
No problem.
Thank you again for joining us here in Homes, Land and You. Have a great day.